Okay, so recording has started. Welcome, Irisa. Can you tell us about your name, your grade, your school, and some extracurricular interest you enjoy after school?
My name is Irisa. I'm uh going to be a senior and I'm from Newport High School. And my main extracurricular right now is writing. I'm working on um a lot of poetry and yeah.
Okay. What's your understanding of generative AI? Can you explain the concepts of generative AI in your own words?
Well, my understanding is they scrape a lot of content that they find on websites, like images that people post or writing that people publish on like ton of fanfic websites too, and then they just put it into they use that to train their thing, but basically a lot of the generation is more of recycling of other people's work. It's kind yeah.
Do you use generative AI in your own life, and how often do you use it?
I basically try to avoid it as much as I can. Yeah.
Have you ever used it? How is that experience like?
The only times that I really used it was when my dad was trying to explain math problems to me and he couldn't explain it, so he looked up stuff on ChatGPT, but I, uh, yeah, but except it always made a ton of errors and never actually did anything correct. So,
Okay. Um, Would you like to see generative AI being incorporated in academia? Why or why not?
like, never. Is this
And
my
then
time to preach? Okay.
what's your reason what's your reasoning behind that?
Because I don't see it helping anyone on any field. Like, you can talk about students who need help getting their work done. There are so many resources for students to get help. There's literally free Khan Academy. There's literally, you can go to school and ask your teachers. You can go to school and ask your friends. You can just Google anything and you'll get a response because there are so many answers and questions and free tutorials out there. But using ChatGPT is kind of like, it's not that much of a shortcut either if you're thinking of ChatGPT as like a different search engine because all it does is paraphrase websites into like paragraphs. And it's not that different as if you were to just scroll down a Google web page. And Google already makes things really easy for you by highlighting like text in blue. Like when you look things up, like it makes the main points of each sentence really clear on its own. So in order to help people with homework, it doesn't really make that much sense. And then if you think about people who are trying to cheat, that's like it doesn't reflect it doesn't help anyone learn. It doesn't reflect any skill either. Just because someone can tell ChatGPT to write an essay for them doesn't mean that they know how to write an essay. And it's it itself is academic dishonesty because you're basically plagiarizing a machine that already plagiarized tons of other free content online. And then so
Okay.
academically it doesn't help, but also environmentally it really does not help either. Like I can send you I think I've sent you the link of that NPR article, but basically basically they found out that one search in ChatGPT takes as much electricity as it takes a light bulb to run for 20 minutes. And so if there are millions of people searching that every day, it's just leaving so many rooms and houses like turned on, like when your mom gets mad at you, is like turn that light off because you're not in that room anymore. And and NPR, that article also said something about how um
Okay,
The MV, huh?
I'm gonna cut you off for a bit because
What?
your thing kind of touched like many aspects and we're gonna go one by one. So
Okay.
like starting off with the analogy to search engines. Actually, that's an analogy that's being used very often in my previous interviews too. So um people say using ChatGPT has the advantage of being very fast and providing you very concise answers in a short amount of times. So that's why people use ChatGPT to read, say, like essays and research papers to give them a quick glance of what's being
I,
told. What do you think are the advantages and the disadvantages comparing using ChatGPT versus Google as a search engine and generally a source of information?
I don't think ChatGPT is that much faster than Google because if your Wi-Fi is bad, it takes the same amount of time. And I don't think ChatGPT is that much more concise than Google either because if you Google anything, you're going to get 20 different sources on the same thing at least, like way more than that. And you're going to get the super academic sources and then you're going to get the super easy fifth grader sources. Like there's brain pop everywhere. There's all these sites and it's also a skill to do research.
Hmm.
So I don't think we need this like maybe like half a second or 2 second like quicker type of understanding because type of search. And also about reading like summaries of research essays, you can already find man-made websites like SparkNotes if you really want to, even though SparkNotes is like okay. But also for research papers, their abstracts and their introductions, like these summaries are built into it itself. And if you have a machine do it, like sure, you get a quick answer, but you also don't know if that answer is really legitimate, if it's accurate, because a lot of these like research papers, they're super nuanced and in-depth and they talk about serious things. And would you really trust an AI who actually doesn't know the subject to summarize it for you and then inform your life? Like, yeah.
So speaking about research skills, you said research skills is a very important things for students to have. If generative AI is being introduced to academias, what are some skills that you think it might hinders in terms of like essential students development? Research skills to name one. What are some other skills you think students might lack using Gen AI?
Uh, okay, so there's research skills, there's writing skills. And I think that kind of goes together. Like in research, you have to think about the where your sources come from and whether they're biased or not. And if you purely search through ChatGPT, you're not gonna know the source material. You're also gonna be filtering your information with an extra lens. Like you'll have like a New York Times article written by someone who's politically this way, and then you have ChatGPT rephrasing it, and you don't know what ChatGPT has been farmed with. There, there's so many loopholes to ChatGPT still where you can just make it say things. And for real information, I'd rather be hearing that from experts than like machine middlemen. Um, Also, writing skills, like the whole point of going to school is to learn how to do stuff yourself. And especially they assign a lot of the assignments are not about results. Like if you're assigned an essay or to do just okay, so if you're assigned an essay, what your teacher wants you to do is to research stuff and then form your own ideas and then put it down. Writing it down is a skill, but also it's just a way for you to practice how to communicate your own ideas. If you have if you have your own ideas, but you just really don't want to write, then there's so many other ways for you to work with your academic setting to make it something where you can still express yourself. Like you can record videos of yourself talking, you can do a presentation, but the point is that you're synthesizing your own knowledge and your own understanding. If you use ChatGPT, you completely skip everything. Like, how do you know that ChatGPT is going to say your ideas in the way that you want it? And most people, when they use ChatGPT, they're not they're just making ChatGPT say their own like ChatGPT's ideas. Like these aren't real ideas.
So if
Um,
I were to give you two scenarios, student A copied the essay prompt and asked ChatGPT to generate an entire essay for them, but student B did some really detailed background research. They basically told ChatGPT about the context of the prompts, their claim, evidence, and reasoning, but asked ChatGPT just as a tool to synthesize their ideas. Would you say there's a difference in how these two students approached their use of ChatGPT and how they wrote their essays?
wait, so one fully made ChatGPT do everything. The other one
Yeah,
fed their own information. Well,
yeah.
they're definitely using ChatGPT differently. Like they're sending different prompts into it. Is that just your question? What?
So like you talk about how students were using generative AI, but they're kind of like giving up on their own learning on how to read and write and how to synthesize information, how to do background research. If I were to give you these two different scenarios, would you say there's a difference in how the students approach their learnings?
Well, yes, there's a difference in how they did their work. At least one student did slightly more work by gathering data on their own. But in the end, that's it's the same as if you just read a bunch of random articles and then thought, oh, that's slightly interesting, and then you just told someone else to write it for you. It's still not your own work. And
Um,
it's the
okay, I guess
process of synthesizing.
let me like rephrase that for a bit. So if a students have all the structure outlined for an essay and they have all the informations needed to write the essay themselves, but they asked ChatGPT to write transitions for them and to connect their ideas together. Would you say that's a legitimate way to use ChatGPT? Because basically what they're doing is they're using generative AI as a tool to do the hard works for them, to do the hard works of um, connecting um, connecting dots together. That doesn't essentially requires much thinking.
Actually, it does to connect dots together because I saw this graph. I'm not gonna be able to find it again. It was a doodle where you have a bunch of dots on a screen that's just data, and then there's each of the dots are colored. That's information, and then there are lines between the dots. That's like wisdom. Basically, if you know that, I think I'm gonna explain this in a STEM way. Like, if you have a bunch of random equations, like 1 plus x equals 3, and then x minus 2 equals 1, like that's not the same thing anyways. If you had a bunch of random equations with random variables in them, and like this is a math problem and you need to solve it or you need to show a proof for it, like the proof. You need to order the ideas in the right way. You need to connect them. You need to explain the right way. Like you have to say this is a property, this is the like subtraction property of equality. Like you have to say like that is the synthesis. Like
That's
connecting the
not what I meant.
ideas is part of your own ideas. Like
So if we were to compare it to a STEM perspective, it's basically saying we are using generative AI as the calculators. We're using calculators to do all the hard math. In some cases, the math are so hard that we can't even do it by our own head, like to name a few like trigonometry and stuff. So we use calculators to do those hard math for a person, right? So in the case of writing, we're just saying we're using generative AI as the calculators to do the really like labor intensive calculations for them. But they are still doing the managing equations, solving the algebra, the intellectual stuff. The students are still demonstrating those skills.
I would say that's an inaccurate analogy because the calculator is strictly objective, like 1 plus 2 equals 3. It cannot equal anything else. But if you had idea A and then you had idea B and you wanted to create a thesis around it all together, like if you feed your thesis into a prompt, then you give the same evidence, you're not going to get the same reasoning for each evidence. Like it's not objective anymore. And there's so many different ways that you could write something. There is no one way to do it. There's no one way to connect it. So, because if you look at every single word, there's like a strict definition. There's not a strict definition, but there are many definitions for every single word, and it changes each time you use it. Like it is an art to write, not just in the way that it's like pretty to look at, but in the way that everything is very intentional, everything is very specific. So there is no way to calculate writing.
Would you say the essays generated by ChatGPT belongs to a student? Would you say the essay is that student's intellectual property?
Definitely not. The
If we
student
go
didn't.
back to the two cases I mentioned, one student provide a simplistic prompts and the other students provide the context, background information, and everything they need to write an essay. Would you say there's a difference in how intellectual property is considered between these two cases?
Well, if I strictly look at the amount of bullet points that the student, like, which one is A and which one is B? Is B the one who,
A is the one that use simplistic prompts. B is the students that articulated the prompts and crafted a very elaborated prompt.
okay, so if I were to just, I think if I were if I were a teacher and I was thinking how much of this is someone's intellectual property, I would look at exactly what they put into ChatGPT. If all student A did was copy the prompts that I wrote, then none of that is theirs. If student B added their own data, I only look at that data and reasoning to be their property. Everything else has been fed through a machine. It's no longer, it's like asking your friend to write an essay for you, even if you wrote the outline for it. Only the outline is your property. The rest was just given to someone else. Because
So
everyone has their, huh?
even if the student provide their outline to ChatGPT, the essay that generated by ChatGPT still doesn't belong to the student.
Would you say that if Newton wrote a bunch of random equations and just put a bunch of random equations on a whiteboard and then some random like physics student walked into the classroom and then took all those equations and then created a whole research paper out of it, would you say that property was Newton's or the students? Because all those equations, all these ideas can exist on their own all the time.
I
But
would say it's the students because they're the one that connected the dots,
exactly. But in
right?
this case, yeah, so if you exactly put this metaphor over, the student is ChatGPT and Newton was student B who fed an elaborate prompt. You know, I'm
I see.
right.
I see. I gotta find a counter argument to this one. Hold
Okay,
on.
what?
Okay, but in the analogy you provided, Houston didn't have any ideas of how his equations would be connected. But the scenarios I was providing to you, student B wrote the entire outline of how they would connect their claim evidence and reasoning. So they basically know what they're gonna write, but they just didn't write it and asked ChatGPT to write it for them. So that's the difference between your analogy and the two cases I provided for you because in your analogy, Newton did not know what he's going to do with all his equations. So,
Newton might have known, but he just
okay.
didn't do anything with it. That's the problem. I think it doesn't matter what semantics it is, whether someone wrote in bullet points or whether someone wrote in paragraphs. And then, like, there's obviously a spectrum between Grammarly and then, like, feeding, like, a basic prompt into ChatGPT. Like, you can say, like, oh, these edits are so minimal. But I think at that point is when is it necessary to have those edits in the first place? Because if you could have written all of that yourself, why did you need to use ChatGPT? And I think it should come as a point of pride to some people because how could you claim to be an expert in this field when you cannot even do all of the work yourself, right? And it's not just hard work, it's not just hard mechanical work because it's very different. I could say there's tons of slang everywhere. Like I could say like, oh, give me an analogy or something. Like,
Well, the analogy I'm gonna give you is gonna rebuttal your ideas because I think writings can be the hard works for some people. Like if you were to just explain a scientific principles to somebody by using writing, it is like it's the matter itself is pretty objective. There's not like subjective ways for you to explain
there
these
is
scientific principles.
because the whole point to get a scientific study like valid is to have peer review, to have other people do that study over and over again. And you're supposed to make your procedure as objective as possible. There's always these different variables. Like you can you can say like if you think about logical fallacies in itself, it's super complicated. And if you think about just how to lie in general, you can lie by omission, right? Like, sure, everything that you said strictly was true, but there was bias in the way you chose what information to say and what not to say. And that already makes it super subjective.
How does
So,
that relate to the use of Gen AI for, say, like
be
scientific research?
because I'm saying it's no longer because every single word you say is important. It's no longer, oh, if I say that I like apples and I tell ChatGPT to write me an essay about how much I like apples, it's not going to be the same thing because, like, you could say that your reason for apples is that they taste sweet, but ChatGPT could say that it tastes citrusy or kind of acidic, right? And all of these mean different things because one is more scientific and one is less well, one sounds nerdy and the other sounds more general. And that's kind of your voice, right? And that is
Oh,
your idea itself. All of these are very, because the point is, if someone's gonna write like, oh my God, I'm delving deep into metaphors that just, the
I
point
think we're
is
go kind of going
everything
astray here.
matters, huh?
Going into metaphors is a bad ways. I don't think going into metaphors is really efficient. So
Yeah, but like
yeah,
you get my point, right? Everything matters. This is not everything can change. Just like you change one word and the whole meaning of a sentence changes.
if I were to explain you why the derivative of e to the power of x is e to the power of x, and I asked ChatGPT to explain to you why the derivative of e to the power of x is e to the power of x, our responses are not going to be very different. So it's not like in writings when people are articulating the passage with their emotions and their subjective ideas, like explain using Gen AI in some STEM fields are different than liberal arts. So they're like different perspectives you can consider those issues from.
Okay, then let's say in a STEM field using Gen I still would not trust. This is just a personal thing now, because I would not trust Gen AI to help me teach because I've tried so many times to ask ChatGPT to um like anti-differentiate stuff, like trig functions that are multiplying each other, and it makes zero sense and it always gives me a wrong answer. If you think that ChatGPT can give you the right answer in that, good luck. On an ethical concern, if you're using ChatGPT exactly like a calculator, you can try it, but I don't think there's any ethical concerns because that's literally a calculator. But if you're using ChatGPT in the realm of like actually writing stuff, that's a huge issue because the writing is part of the idea making. And that's why we have this phrase called you write to discover. Like you may have your evidence, you may have your bullet point reasoning, but everything still changes when you put it on the page because those ideas actually start to become real.
Okay, I'm gonna go to our next topics now because the time is kind of limited. But okay, so the assumptions for these questions right now is that we're saying generative AI is being widely used in academias and they're not being considered um, as a way of cheating. They're not being considered as academic dishonesty. So assuming that everyone is using AI, how can a students show their own intellectual thinkings and analytical thinkings while using Gen AI? What are some ways that um, that the students could do it?
So the only real life situation I've been in where one of my teachers actually told people to use ChatGPT was in AP Gov, and we were making bills. I wasn't making the bills because I had a different position, but there are other people in the class who were like pretending to be senators, right? And they were making bills and about like money. And so my teacher basically told us that so he put this page in OneNote that was basically a table, and on one side of the table, like one column was your prompt into ChatGPT. You have to copy paste exactly what you sent ChatGPT. On the other side, you put what ChatGPT responded to you with, and then the next row you would have to write what you edited. Like you clearly show what you changed from it and what wasn't changed. And when my teacher would look back and grade it, he would only look at the column that had your own edits and your own writing in it. Like, because for the point of our simulation, it was just supposed to get some bill on the table. Because in that case, it was really where the result didn't matter, but it just needed to be there as a placeholder because it was a simulation for Congress, right? But what mattered to my teacher was we put what we wrote for the prompt.
Consider
I
this issue as a teacher's point of view. If you were the AP Gov teachers, or say like your AP Lit teachers, how would your teaching standards and your ways of teaching change to adapt to the wide use of generative AI among students?
um Okay, so for AP Gov, there's not a lot of cases. Well, okay, sorry, I'm gonna restart my answer. Um, as an AP Lit teacher, I literally just make everyone write with their pencils on paper, timed writes in class. No essay, no take-home essays, nothing like that. Like go back to where I can prove that everything is um like written by you.
Mhm. Okay, I guess like combining with the previous question for a bit. You are the teacher, you want the students to demonstrate intellectual thinking, analytical thinking while they're using Gen AI. So don't just like simply take Gen AI out of the equation. If you consider Gen AI as being part of their learning, what are some ways that you think students can demonstrate their thinking while using ChatGPT? I think your AP Gov teacher make like a really good examples. Can you think of any other parallel things that are kind of similar to that idea, or some other ideas that you think can help students internalize their thinking?
No, I think the only way to do that would for the student to never turn in work done by ChatGPT. I think one way that you could use it just as not as a source, but just as an excerpt, like you could um like ask ChatGPT to explain something and then ask the students to respond and say why this is wrong, why this is correct, what they disagree with or what they agree with, kind of like you would find anything on the internet, because I don't think you can combine students' work with ChatGPT's work and call it theirs. It's not theirs. It has to be something that the student does to it. That's the only thing I would look for.
So you mentioned that when you're asking ChatGPT to do the antiderivative work for you, and they often give you the wrong answers. I would suppose part of the reason to that is the prompt engineering for generative AI is not perfect now, so it's still a developing process. So like AI as a technology is definitely going to improve, right? So in like 10 years or 15 years, 20 years, how do you envision the power of AI to change and how it could further affect students' learning in 20 years?
I think that people are just gonna abuse it more and more. And we're just going to have this war of like, how can we prove if something is done by you or something is done by something that isn't you? And I think that's just what's going to happen. Like, no matter how good ChatGPT gets, the value of it will not go up. Even if a student feeds, if for example, right now in 2024, a student feeds a prompt in ChatGPT and it gives you a mediocre essay, and then in 20 years, they feed the exact same prompt into ChatGPT and it gives you like a great essay. Okay, so we just have a great essay written by a bot. Nobody cares about the essay because the student in the end will not have learned anything. And what are you going to get from it? It's just an essay because a lot of this is it's practice for yourself as an individual to make things on your own. There is no value in just someone else doing it. It's like ghostwriters, like, okay, you didn't write this yourself.
So you don't think there's a way for students to embrace the widespread of Gen AI and to kind of live with Gen AI in peace?
I don't think we have to just sit down and accept things or just take it. Like we do not have to embrace every single new technology that people have made. Like we're not powerless, you know? And I think a lot of the school is kind of teaching is that you have your own ideas and you can think on your own. It's not about what to think, it's about how to think. And you learn how to create your own ways of thinking. And if I think you need the basic foundation for anything. Like you need to learn the basic curriculum for anything, but that's only the first step in actually learning any and actually mastering something, right?
Okay,
So
right.
I think
So,
school itself is teaching us that just because we know that ChatGPT exists does not mean that is all there is. We can still live without it.
okay, my last two questions for the interview, and then I'm gonna ask you for the feedbacks. So we have 3 minutes left, so let's try to like keep these two questions under 3 minutes. So the first question will be, there are teachers and students in the schools that are very strongly opposed against the use of ChatGPT in classrooms. They would prefer a total ban over the use of ChatGPT. What's your comments about this group of people in academias?
I'd say I'm one of them. Okay.
Any comments?
I think they're right. I don't want
Okay.
people to plagiarize people. Like, that's a huge part of academia is plagiarism sucks. And ChatGPT is just asking a bot to do the writing for you. It's the same thing as plagiarizing a real human. It's
There's
not yours.
also another group of students that's are perhaps more technology focused. They say the total ban of technologies such as ChatGPT and generative AI is like an insult to the spread of technology because what these group of people are doing is um, they're saying the conservatives are like refusing to embrace the use of technologies. What's your comments toward this group of people?
I would not call it conservatives. Like, no one has ever used that term before. But I would say it's actually an insult that they're trying to use Gen AI to infiltrate these spaces literally made for humans. It's called humanities for a reason. And I think it's an insult that they can think they can ban our thinking, really just kind of try to override it and automate things. Just so they who are not humanities people, just because some computer science people don't want to write doesn't mean they have to take the fun away from the rest of us.
If you consider these two group of people as the very end, the two end of a spectrum, would you say there's a middle ground in this spectrum where the line should be drawn, where kind of the AI ethics should be determined to be?
I think the only middle ground is Grammarly and word autocorrect. Like, that's the only truly objective thing.
Okay,
So I would
so
accept using autocorrect, but because it doesn't change my ideas, it just says that I spelled the word gray wrong, whether it's American or British English. Like,
perhaps very specifically tuned models of AI that are used for purposes like autocorrecting only. Is that what you're saying?
yeah. But even then, I would really caution against those that finish my phrases. I know Word has started implementing that. Like,
Mm,
that just because I say to does not mean I'm gonna say and fro after it. But yeah.
okay. All right, I'm gonna stop recording now.